Hands behind your back. Do not move.
I'm complying. I'm not resisting.
Stay exactly where you are. Eyes forward.
I'm Federal Law Enforcement Special Agent Marcus Hale. My credentials are inside my jacket.
Do not reach for anything.
I'm not reaching for anything. This is a mistake. You need to verify my ID immediately.
Hold him right there.
I'm on official duty. Call this in right now.
Special Agent Marcus Hale was thinking about whether he'd make it to his son's middle school basketball game when the enforcement team slammed him to the ground. Not figuratively, literally. One moment, Marcus was walking along Market Street in downtown San Diego, coffee in one hand, briefing notes in the other, mentally calculating whether he could catch the 7:10 p.m. flight back to Chicago. The next, his face was forced into sun-baked concrete as three armed agents shouted overlapping commands that made no sense together. His coffee cup burst on impact, splashing across the sidewalk. The paper bag holding his lunch collapsed under someone's boot. Pedestrians froze, then scattered, startled by the sudden violence erupting in the middle of lunchtime traffic. This wasn't how federal officers were supposed to treat each other. But Marcus had learned years ago that a badge didn't shield everyone equally. Not when your skin was black. 10 years with the Bureau, multiple commendations, counterintelligence training, fluent in 2 languages, a master's degree from Northwestern University. None of it mattered the moment a tactical unit from Border Enforcement Operations decided he resembled someone they were tracking. And every second of it was being captured on body cameras. Footage that would later be valued at just under $900,000. Agent Luke Brennan, the team lead, had exactly 4 seconds between hearing the radio call, target moving southbound, and spotting Marcus on the sidewalk. Male, early 30s, athletic build, dark jacket, that was enough. Brennan's camera was already recording when instinct overtook training. Years of enforcement had conditioned him to see threat before context, assumption before verification. He didn't notice that Marcus wasn't carrying the backpack their actual target had been described with. Didn't question why a wanted fugitive would stroll through a crowded business district holding coffee, dressed like a consultant heading to a meeting. He saw a black man and acted, "Stop right there, hands where I can see them." The voice carried that sharp federal authority, the kind that expected obedience without explanation. Marcus stopped immediately. Confusion flashed first. Then recognition, then dread. His training took over automatically. Hands visible, no sudden movements. Assess, identify, de-escalate. He turned slowly and saw 3 agents in tactical vests marked BEO, weapons unholstered but not yet raised. That was when he understood exactly what was about to happen. He'd heard the stories before, quiet conversations with other black agents, warnings passed over late-night drinks. One day it'll be you. "I'm federal law enforcement," Marcus said calmly. "Special Agent Marcus Hale. My credentials are in my inner jacket pocket. There's been a mistake." His voice was steady, the same tone he used in interviews, briefings, sworn testimony. Brennan stepped closer. "I don't care what you claim to be," he snapped. "Drop the coffee and get on the ground now." The other agents moved into position, textbook containment. Agent Sullivan angled right, Agent Core moved left. Agent Morales stayed back, her camera capturing the growing crowd, office workers, tourists, phones already rising. "I'm with the Bureau," Marcus repeated. "Chicago field office. You can verify my ID." He began moving his left hand toward his jacket, slow, deliberate, fingers spread wide, the exact movement he'd taught new agents for years. That's when Sullivan shouted. "He's reaching," and everything detonated. Morales hit him first, slamming into Marcus's side with full momentum. The force sent them both crashing onto the sidewalk. Marcus's head struck the pavement hard enough to flash white behind his eyes. His coffee arced through the air, splattering across a parked sedan. Before he could breathe, Core drove a knee into his upper back. Brennan twisted Marcus's arm behind him, pain exploding through his shoulder. "Federal agent," Marcus shouted, gasping. "Check my jacket." No one listened. Adrenaline had taken over. "Stop resisting," Brennan yelled, even though Marcus wasn't resisting at all. Marcus went limp. He knew the rules. Compliance was survival. The cuffs snapped on tight, far tighter than necessary, metal biting into his wrists as the cameras kept rolling. And downtown San Diego became the backdrop for a career-ending mistake. Marcus lay pinned to the sidewalk, the weight on his back making each breath shallow and forced. The concrete beneath his cheek radiated heat, burning his skin where it pressed against his face. Someone's palm shoved the back of his head down harder, grinding grit into his jaw. "Do not move," Brennan barked. Marcus wasn't moving. He couldn't even if he wanted to. Core's knee was planted between his shoulder blades, crushing his lungs just enough to trigger panic, the kind his training warned him about. Panic got you hurt. Panic got you killed. He focused on breathing, slow and controlled, counting in his head like he'd been taught. "I'm federal law enforcement," he said again, voice strained but clear. "Special Agent Marcus Hale. My credentials are in my jacket." Inside pocket, the cameras caught everything. Brennan's view showed his own hand cinching the cuffs tighter than necessary, an unconscious flex of authority mixed with fear. Sullivan's angle captured the crowd now fully stopped, phones raised, murmurs rippling outward. Morale's wide shot framed the entire scene. 3 armed agents kneeling on one man in business attire. Lunch hour traffic stalled, horns blaring in irritation. Name? Brennan demanded. Marcus Hale, he answered. Badge number 6842, Chicago Field Office. There was a pause, not long, but long enough to matter. Search him, Brennan said. Sullivan patted down Marcus's jacket, his movements sharp and hurried. When his hand slid into the inner pocket, it came out holding a black credential wallet. The bureau seal was unmistakable. Sullivan opened it. The change in his face was instant. His skin drained of color as the gold badge caught the sunlight. The photo ID matched the man on the ground perfectly. Same face, same eyes, same name. Brennan, Sullivan said quietly. You need to see this. Brennan snatched the credentials, flipping them open, then over, then back again as if repetition might change reality. It didn't. Special Agent Marcus Hale, active status, valid clearance. Oh, Brennan said. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was the sound of a career collapsing. He's bureau, Morales muttered. For several seconds, no one moved. 3 federal agents froze mid-action, still kneeling on a fellow agent in the center of a public sidewalk, surrounded by witnesses and recording devices. Get off me, Marcus said. His voice was quiet now, controlled, dangerous. Get your knees off my back, take these cuffs off, now. They scrambled away as if he'd become untouchable. Cora's hands shook as she unlocked the cuffs, fumbling once before getting the key in. Brennan reached to help Marcus up, but Marcus jerked away, pain flaring through his shoulder. He stood on his own. His suit jacket was torn at the seam. His shirt smeared with coffee and dirt. Blood traced a thin line along his cheek. His wrists were already red and swelling where the cuffs had bitten down. Let me explain, Brennan started. Don't, Marcus cut him off. Just don't. He took his credentials back, checked them instinctively, then slid them into his jacket. Who's your supervisor? I am, Brennan said, the worst possible answer. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then get me your supervisor. Immediately, because you just assaulted a federal agent, unlawfully detained me, and violated my constitutional rights, all on camera. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 people now. One woman in a navy blazer stepped forward, holding a phone. I recorded everything, she said, from before they touched you. Thank you, Marcus replied, the professional mask cracking just enough to show the man underneath. I'll need that. They exchanged information as his phone buzzed. Incoming call, Deputy Sakalaine Porter, Chicago. She already knew. Marcus, she said when he answered, document everything, photos, witnesses, body cams. Get to the San Diego field office now, I'm calling theirs. Her language after that was not suitable for transcription. Within 20 minutes, 2 bureau agents arrived in an unmarked SUV. One look at Marcus and then at the enforcement team still standing awkwardly nearby told them everything they needed to know. You put hands on one of ours? Agent Natalie Cruz asked, her voice dangerously calm. No one answered. The ride to the field office was silent. Marcus stared out the window, shoulder throbbing, jaw tight, replaying every second, knowing this moment would never really end. The San Diego field office conference room smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee, the familiar scent of federal buildings everywhere. Marcus sat rigidly in a hard-backed chair while a contracted medical examiner documented his injuries with clinical efficiency. Any loss of consciousness? No. Headache? Yes. Pain level in the shoulder? 7, maybe 8 when I move it. Photos were taken from every angle, scraped cheek, abrasions along his jaw. Deep red cuff marks already darkening toward purple. Limited range of motion in his right shoulder. Bruising beginning to surface along his ribs. Nothing life-threatening, everything prosecutable. Agent Natalie Cruz stood near the door, arms crossed, jaw set so tightly Marcus could see the muscle flexing. Beside her, Agent Daniel Wu quietly took notes, his pen scratching nonstop. This is bad, Cruz muttered. This is really bad, Marcus gave a humorless half-smile. That obvious? Wu looked up. 3 body cams plus civilian footage, downtown location, no resistance, clear verbal ID. He didn't finish the sentence, he didn't have to. Deputy Sac Marisol Vega entered moments later, phone still in her hand, eyes blazing. She took one look at Marcus and swore softly, viciously. They thought you were their guy, she said, not a question. They didn't think, Marcus replied. Vega nodded once. Internal Affairs is already requesting copies, so is DOJ oversight. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced by a deep, bone-level exhaustion, the kind that settled in when you realized something irreversible had happened. Am I grounded? He asked. No, Vega said, but you're not flying commercial tonight. Doctor's orders, shoulder sling, pain meds, tomorrow morning, bureau transport. Marcus nodded. Later that evening, alone in a government-issued hotel room, he finally let himself sit with it. The replay wouldn't stop, the shout. The impact, the knee in his back, the cuffs biting down. He showered longer than necessary, watching brown water swirl down the drain, scrubbing pavement grit from his skin until it burned. When he caught his reflection in the mirror, the man staring back looked older, smaller somehow. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his ex-wife. Lena didn't bother with pleasantries. What happened? She said flatly. Marcus told her. By the time he finished, there was silence on the other end, the dangerous kind. They racially profiled you, she said finally. Assaulted you on camera. Yes, you're suing, I know. No, Lena corrected, you're suing hard. Federal court, civil rights violations, excessive force, everything. Marcus leaned back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought the badge was enough. Lena laughed once, sharp, bitter. You of all people should know better. The flight back to Chicago the next morning was quiet. Marcus wore a sling. His shoulder throbbed with every movement. The bruises had deepened overnight, blooming across his ribs like ink spilled under skin. At O'Hare, his daughter Naomi saw him first. She froze, then ran. Daddy, she cried, wrapping her arms around him carefully, eyes already filling. What happened to your face? Marcus swallowed. Work stuff, he said gently. Lena shot him a look that said we'll talk later. That night after Naomi was asleep, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with ice packs and paperwork spread around him. Incident reports, medical notes, names, badge numbers. He stared at the still image pulled from one of the body cams, his own face pressed against concrete, eyes shut tight. That was when the anger finally arrived, not explosive, not loud, cold. The next morning, Marcus met Ethan Ross. Civil rights attorney, former federal prosecutor, the kind of man whose reputation made government lawyers sweat. Ross watched the footage in silence, all of it, 3 angles, no interruptions. When it ended, he leaned back. They'll try to settle, Ross said calmly, low, insulting. And if they don't, Ross smiled, thin, confident, then we take them apart in public. Marcus nodded once. For the first time since San Diego, something in his chest eased. The government's first offer arrived 3 months later, $45,000, no admission of wrongdoing, no disciplinary guarantees, just a standard release form and a quiet expectation that Marcus would take the money and disappear. Ethan Ross didn't even forward it. He sent a single-line response instead, we'll see you in court. 6 weeks later, the number jumped to $180,000. Ross finally showed Marcus that one not because it was tempting, but because it perfectly illustrated how the Department of Justice handled cases like his. Start low, wear them down, bet on silence, fatigue, and fear. They think you'll want this to go away, Ross said, sliding the offer across the table in his downtown office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago River, the city moving on outside like nothing had happened. They don't know me very well, Marcus replied. Ross smiled. No, they don't. The lawsuit was filed 2 days later in federal court. Marcus Hale v. United States of America, naming Luke Brennan, Sean Sullivan, Aisha Kaur, and Alina Morales individually. Fourth Amendment violations, excessive force, false arrest, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The evidence package was devastating, 3 synchronized body camera feeds, 7 civilian witness statements, medical records documenting physical injuries, psychological evaluations confirming acute stress disorder, an internal memorandum from the Chicago field office condemning the actions of the enforcement team. The government's response was predictable. They argued reasonable suspicion, claimed Marcus's movement toward his jacket constituted a potential threat, asserted the agents acted in good faith based on the description provided, insisted the force used was within policy given the perceived risk. Ross dismantled it piece by piece. The description was so vague it applied to half the city, he said during a pretrial hearing. Race, age range, general build, clothing color, that's not reasonable suspicion, that's profiling. Marcus wasn't evasive, he was walking normally, he wasn't aggressive, he was compliant, he wasn't silent. He identified himself repeatedly, and the footage proved it. Discovery took nearly a year, depositions were brutal. Brennan admitted he never reviewed the actual surveillance photo before making contact. Sullivan acknowledged that Marcus didn't match key identifiers, no backpack, no facial scar. Kaur conceded that Marcus never resisted. Morales broke down halfway through her testimony. I thought he was reaching for a weapon, she said quietly. And when he told you he was federal law enforcement, Ross asked. She hesitated. I didn't process it. The trial began 16 months after San Diego. The courtroom was packed every day. Agents from multiple agencies filled the gallery. Some sat behind Marcus, others behind the defense. The divide was visible and uncomfortable. On day 2, the body camera footage played, all 3 angles. Simultaneously, on a massive split screen, the sound of Marcus's body hitting concrete echoed through the courtroom. You could hear the impact, the gasp, the shouted commands overlapping into chaos. Several jurors flinched. One woman wiped tears from her cheeks. A man in a veteran's cap shook his head slowly, jaw clenched. Marcus testified for 2 full days. He walked the jury through his career, training, commendations. Operations he couldn't fully describe because they were still classified. Then he described the moment everything shifted. The second I realized they weren't going to listen, he said, voice steady, I knew I had 2 choices. Resist and risk being killed, or comply and hope I survived. He paused. That's a calculation I've made my entire life. I just never thought I'd make it with other federal agents. The defense called Brennan. It went poorly. Under Ross's cross-examination, Brennan admitted the truth slowly, painfully. Yes, he said, I relied heavily on the physical description. And race was a major component of that description, Ross pressed. Brennan swallowed. Yes, you didn't verify identity. No, you didn't de-escalate. No, and you used force anyway. Silence. Yes, the courtroom felt heavy after that. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Marcus waited in a small conference room, checking his phone, pretending to read reports, trying not to think about what losing would mean. When the call finally came, his hands shook. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled in minutes. Every seat was taken. People stood along the walls, whispering, phones tucked away under the watchful eyes of court officers. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded tightly, shoulders still aching beneath his suit jacket. The jury filed in. Marcus searched their faces for anything: anger, sympathy, doubt. Nothing. The foreperson stood. A man in his late 50s, calm, composed, former military if Marcus had to guess by posture alone. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, he said, voice steady, Special Agent Marcus Hale on all counts. The air left Marcus's lungs all at once. A quiet ripple moved through the courtroom, restrained gasps, a muffled sob, the sharp tap of the judge's gavel calling for order. Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time since San Diego, his chest loosened. The relief was immediate, overwhelming, followed closely by exhaustion so deep it felt physical. But the case wasn't over. The damages phase began the following week. The jury heard from Marcus's psychologist, Dr. Evelyn Park, who detailed the symptoms that had emerged after the incident: hypervigilance, nightmares, elevated anxiety around law enforcement interactions, difficulty sleeping. They heard from Naomi. She sat in the witness chair, feet not quite touching the floor, hands folded in her lap. My dad checks the locks every night now, she said softly. He didn't used to do that. Several jurors couldn't meet Marcus's eyes. An economist testified next, outlining lost future earnings, the likelihood of early retirement, reduced operational assignments, therapy costs projected over decades. And then came the intangible damages, the humiliation, the fear, the public nature of the assault, the knowledge that even a federal badge hadn't protected him. When the jury returned with the damages decision, the room went silent. Compensatory damages, the foreperson read, in the amount of $5.1 million. A pause. Punitive damages, he continued, in the amount of $4.2 million. Total $9.3 million, the largest civil rights verdict against federal enforcement officers in the district's history. Brennan stared straight ahead, face pale. Sullivan lowered his head. Cor pressed her lips together, eyes wet. Morales looked physically ill. 3 days later, Brennan was terminated. Sullivan resigned before formal discipline could begin. Cor and Morales were reassigned to administrative roles, their field careers effectively over. The Department of Justice released a carefully worded statement expressing disappointment with the verdict while respecting the judicial process. No apology. No admission. Marcus remained with the Bureau for another 18 months, but something fundamental had changed. The trust was gone, the sense of safety gone. At 40, Marcus submitted his retirement papers. He used part of the settlement to build something new, a training and consulting firm focused on constitutional policing, bias recognition, and de-escalation. He spoke to departments across the country, testified as an expert witness in civil rights cases, taught officers to verify before acting, to see people before threats. The footage from San Diego became mandatory viewing at the academy, not as punishment, as a warning. Marcus never returned to San Diego, not physically, but the city followed him everywhere. In quiet moments, waiting at a crosswalk, standing in line for coffee, hearing the sharp crack of a radio squelch, his body reacted before his mind could. Shoulders tightening, jaw clenching, eyes scanning, hands, waistlines, exits. Dr. Park called it conditioned vigilance. Marcus called it survival. The consulting firm took off faster than he expected. Departments booked him months in advance. Some came willingly, chiefs and command staff who understood the liability, the optics, the moral cost of doing nothing. Others came reluctantly, forced by consent decrees, lawsuits, or recommended corrective training buried in settlement language. Those rooms were harder, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, officers who thought they already knew the Constitution. Marcus didn't lecture, he showed them video, frame by frame. This is where verification should have happened, he'd say calmly. This is where bias filled in the gaps. This is where control replaced judgment. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The footage did the work for him. Meanwhile, the appeals came and went. The government challenged the punitive damages. A 3-judge panel upheld the verdict in full, quietly, without fanfare. The check arrived 6 months later. Marcus stared at the number longer than he expected. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like compensation for something that could never be fully repaired. The enforcement agency conducted an internal review. Results classified, training bulletins updated, language adjusted. Nothing publicly acknowledged beyond vague commitments to ongoing improvement. No press conference, no apology, just bureaucracy smoothing over a scar. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after the incident, Marcus received an email from the academy. Subject line, Curriculum Update Mandatory Case Study. They titled the module after the location. Market Street Incident. Marcus sat back in his chair, absorbing that. His worst day had become a lesson plan. That night, Naomi asked him a question he hadn't been ready for. Do you still trust the police? Marcus didn't answer immediately. I trust systems when they're watched, he said finally. And people when they prove they deserve it. She nodded, satisfied or maybe just accepting. In quiet moments, Marcus sometimes replayed the question he'd asked himself on that sidewalk. Would the badge protect me? He knew the answer now, only accountability did. Years later, Marcus returned to Market Street for the first time, not for work, not for court, just coffee. The sidewalk looked the same storefronts, same midday rush, same uneven cracks in the concrete. Most people passed without noticing anything unusual. To them, it was just another stretch of city pavement. Marcus noticed everything. He stood where it had happened, right where his coffee had hit the ground. Right where his cheek had burned against the sun-heated concrete. Right where the cameras had kept rolling while his world shifted on its axis. There was no plaque, no marker, no acknowledgement. There never is. He ordered coffee from a corner cafe and stepped outside, letting the cup warm his hands. For a brief moment, his pulse quickened, a reflex he recognized and accepted. Then it slowed. He watched people walk past, office workers, tourists, families, law enforcement officers moving through the crowd, unnoticed, unremarkable. That was the point, he realized. Power is most dangerous when it's invisible. Marcus finished his coffee and walked away. Back in Chicago, his firm had expanded again. New trainers, new contracts, departments that once resisted now requested him by name. His testimony had shaped policies in 3 states. His expert opinions had appeared in appellate decisions, and still the footage endured. Every new class at the academy watched it in silence. Recruits leaned forward, some flinched, some looked away. Instructors paused the video at key moments, the assumptions, the failure to verify, the unnecessary force. This is what happens, they said, when authority outruns judgment. Marcus never attended those sessions. He didn't need to. The lesson was no longer his alone. On quiet nights, when the city outside his apartment settled into a low hum, Marcus sometimes thought about the younger version of himself. The man who believed credentials were armor, that professionalism was protection, that the system would recognize its own. He didn't feel bitterness anymore, just clarity. Justice, he had learned, wasn't automatic. It wasn't guaranteed by titles or badges. It existed only when someone demanded it, loudly, publicly, relentlessly. The system hadn't worked because it was fair. It had worked because it had been forced to. And that, Marcus decided, was enough reason to keep telling the story, because the real danger was never a man walking down the street with coffee in his hand. It was the prejudice behind the badge, deciding guilt before questions, force before facts, fear before truth. And the only antidote to that was accountability, every time. If you believe federal badges should protect everyone equally, and that no one should be treated as a suspect based solely on appearance, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Do you think accountability actually changed anything in this case, or would the same thing happen again today? Read the comments and join the discussion. The truth only matters when people are willing to talk about it.